very lucky to have with us the Riverkeeper, and so far as I know, is this true, Captain, that this is the sort of first sort of real sort of public discourse on the process to which you have gone in deciding it would be best long-term for
It is.
for the Hackensack River to be designated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as a Superfund site. That's a complicated process I know pretty well since I wrote some of the regulations from the very beginning of the law. And there are a number of examples where riverine systems, either in part or in whole, have in fact been designated as Superfund sites. And there are tough questions to figure out about whether or not the way in which mitigation, as it's going to be understood by the USPA, should the Hackensack be designated as Superfund site, would actually relate to issues associated, important issues related to mitigation for flood control. And so there's no one in the world, I believe, who understands our system better than the guy from whom we are going to hear for the next few minutes to explain why, after all these years, I'm not going to go into a lot about the history of this man because most of you know him for longer than I do. But he is, I've come to know that he brings an enormous capacity to understand this entire system in all its dimensions, and the true empathy for the impacts on all the different parties who are affected by it. And he thinks it's time to get the US EPA in here and designate this as a Superfund site. And we'd like to know why.
Well, thank you. That was quite an introduction. And thanks for inviting me. And this is exactly what I had in mind for the community when I pulled the trigger and sent that note into the EPA, asking that they consider listing the river. I knew that it was going to rattle some cages. I knew that it was going to cause some concern. I also knew that it was the right thing to do. And it took me a long time to come to that conclusion. If somebody would have said to me 10 years ago, list the river as a Superfund site, I would have thrown them off my boat. I would have, I watched the process on the Hudson River with a great deal of interest, being a member of the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, having fished the Hudson River for many, many years for recreation, for fun, and listening to the back and forth between the General Electric Corporation and the US EPA was just a knockdown, drag-out battle that went on and on and on and on. And we thought it was never going to come to a conclusion. And, then the planets kind of lined up for the Hudson River when our former governor, Christine Whitman, was the administrator. One of her touchstones when she was governor was the Hudson River Superfund site. And she was constantly on the side of getting that river cleaned up. We didn't agree on everything. I got to be honest, but there was some key things that we did agree upon. And when she became administrator of EPA, she actually took charge of the Hudson River process and finished it and put General Electric to work cleaning up the river. That was the first sign of encouragement for me that the Superfund process, the circular process, was not completely broken, and I started saying, well, maybe this is a good idea after all. And I started getting the reports back, the annual reports, after they complete the work. EPA Superfund personnel, they share the information with me, how much material they removed, the monitoring that's going on, how, after the first season of dredging, they monitor the river just below the Troy Dam there, the locks, and the discharge was the difference between night and day, the amount of PCBs that were washing over the dam. And then another thing happened within the past 10 years that opened up my eyes a little bit, and that was when, contrary to the wishes of Mayor Bloomberg, the Gowanus Canal got listed as a Superfund site. Mayor Bloomberg had the attitude that, let business do it, they'll take care of it quicker and easier, and the EPA stepped in. And because of the community that surrounds the Gowanus Canal and the need to get that waterway fixed up, EPA not only did they list it, but they've already come up with a remedy for it. And now the remedy is going through the hearing process, and they're going to have that fixed in what might be considered record time for a Superfund site. And it's, I've been on the Gowanus Canal in a boat, and I was worried that I wouldn't have a propeller. I thought it was going to melt right off my motor. Every time I made a turn in the Gowanus Canal, a sheen of oil came up from the bottom, out of the muck and the mire, that would cover the whole top of the water. So I knew that the sediments there were horribly, horribly. And when I heard that was going to be a Superfund, I said, okay, that's a good thing, and I've been watching that process. And then last year, I was invited to the city of Newark. It was around this time of year last year. We all showed up down on the riverfront in Newark, New Jersey, and Judith Ank announced that they had come up with a proposed remedy for the Passaic River after almost 30 years of back and forth with the Diamond Shamrock Company. They finally said, enough is enough. This is going to be the remedy, and they started moving that process forward. And I said, I think now is the time to consider this. We have an EPA that apparently has figured out how to use this gift that they were given, this CERCLA law. It was, produced during the era when Jim Florio was in Congress, and he was one of the principal architects of CERCLA, and that was as a result of the Love Canal thing. So, it's been around for a long time. It's had its successes, and God knows it's had its shortcomings. If anybody knows about the Ringwood issues with the Ford Motor Company disposal of all kinds of stuff up in the mines in Ringwood, it's not been a great record. And there's been, to this day, the people in Ringwood have not, they haven't gotten the justice they deserve or the cleanup that they deserve. But, this is the time. We have a regional administrator who is really a gung-ho person when it comes to getting these things done. And so about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was speaking with my staff attorney, and he was the one that said to me, why don't we just get the river listed? And I said, don't even talk to me about that, what do you mean, list the river? I've been working all these years to try and get this river fixed up and get people to understand that they can enjoy this river, and now I'm going to have to come out and say, oh, by the way, it's a Superfund site. How's that going to look? But then he explained it to me, and everyone in this room, at some point, you're going to deal with your own mortality, and you're going to realize that the work you start, you may not live to see it finished, but that doesn't make it any less important. So with that in mind, we started having talks. We talked with the USEPA first. We went there and we kind of just threw it on the table. What would the reception be is what we wanted to know. And the folks that work in Superfund over there and the regional administrator were, they were kind of shocked that we were there talking about listing the river as a Superfund, but they understood why we were there. And one of the things that I found to be affirming of my position was the fact that EPA instructed us to go talk to the New Jersey DEP. We're a nonprofit institution, the Hackensack Riverkeeper organization. I've got a total of 7 employees, and we have a small office on Main Street across the river. And here's the federal U.S. Environmental Protection Agency telling me to go and talk to the state of New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. How many thousands of people do they have working between those two agencies? But it turns out that they weren't talking to each other. You know, so after we got done with our first conversation with EPA, it took several months, but we finally got a meeting with the DEP, the people that handle what in New Jersey we refer to as a spill act. It's a corresponding law to CERCLA. In New Jersey, it's called the Spill Act, and it has the same force in the state of New Jersey as Superfund has throughout the country. You may have read some Spill Act news recently about the settlement on the ExxonMobil, and that's another whole conversation we could have for hours. So I'm not going to go down there, but that's a Spill Act case, and that's why it's so big, and that's why it's being debated continuously now as to settle or not to settle, roll your dice with the court or not roll your dice with the court. But we went in there open-minded, open-handed, and we told them exactly what we had in mind. And we asked the New Jersey DEP what they thought of that situation. And we were informed by them that they were in favor of listing the river as a Superfund study area, but that they thought that it would be better served if we went to the existing Superfund sites in the Meadowlands, in the lower part of the river, and then extended those Superfund sites out to the main part of the river and up and down the river. And, you know, I said, why would you do that? And they said, well, we've already got responsible parties on the hook there, so by expanding the boundaries of the Superfund sites that they're responsible for, we can catch them all in one net. And I said, yeah, but there are hundreds of others that are going to be standing on the sidelines that you're not going to catch. You're not going to catch them in the net because you're concentrating on 4 or 5 major polluters instead of concentrating on who did what, where, and when. And so we went back to EPA and we told them what the EPA had told us. For a brief moment there, I kind of felt like the third man. And you're old enough to know what that was about. You know, I was like the neutral party going back and forth between the EPA and the DEP, kind of like a courier almost. But it was very, very helpful to be in that position. And so I guess it was in January. Yeah, it was January. It was freezing cold. There was snow on the ground. Met again with the regional administrator and her Superfund staff down at the EPA offices that they have in Edison, right off of, I think it's Route 1 down there. They have a complex where they have offices. And we went there one day and we had this meeting. And it was during that meeting that they agreed that, perhaps the river should be listed. And so what's the next move? And they told me, well, we would expect you to send us a petition which would ask us to do the study that's needed to determine whether or not the river could be listed. And I had my attorney with me, and they actually gave the citation from the Code of Federal Regulations, the number of the regulation, where it says that citizens, any citizen, can petition the EPA to have a site listed or studied for listing under Superfund. And so on February 10th of this year, we crafted like a 2-page letter laying out just some, in very, very general and broad terms, what we were looking to do, and asking the EPA to commence the assessment of the river to determine whether or not it actually belonged on that list. And as soon as we sent that petition into EPA, we sent a copy of it over to the record. As a matter of fact, I had a preliminary conversation with Jim O'Neill at the record, and I'll just take these and pass them around so people can look at them. A lot of people may have seen them already, some people maybe not. But Jim O'Neill has been reporting on the environment for the record now for several years. Bright young guy. And we were at another event talking about something completely different, and I told him, I said, I'm going to have a scoop for you. in sometime in February, but I can't tell you what it is now. But you're going to get it 24 hours before the rest of the media. And that's, in the newspaper business, that's bold.
Yeah.
You know, that's they take that to the bank. And so, you know, true to my word, the day that the letter went to the EPA, I got a copy of the letter over to Jim and explained to him, this is the story I was telling you about, this is big. And he read the petition letter, looked up the regulations, and wrote a front page story, top of the fold, the best real estate you can have in the newspaper. A few days later, Mike Kelly, who's a columnist for the Record, he decided to weigh in on it. It must have, you know, fired up his imagination, because he wrote a very extensive editorial. And then, unbeknownst to me, Jim O'Neill went out and started questioning public officials. He talked to Jimmy Casella down in East Rutherford. He talked to Mayor Ganelli over in Secaucus. He talked to several business people in the lower part of the river. And, you know, and it's all reported in one of those stories that there was not a naysayer amongst them. Everybody said it's about time. And, you know, they weren't even sure what they were condoning at the moment when they said it, I'm sure, but they were all, yeah, if this is what the Riverkeeper feels is necessary, we're in favor of it. You know, and then, you know, I was expecting a tsunami of protest from, not only from public officials, but from people that had businesses along the river, people that had their eye on maybe bringing business along the river, that, you know, what was I doing? What am I, crazy? I was expecting all that. It has not happened, folks. Every place I've gone since this story broke, I've had nothing but compliments from people for taking a stand and pushing this forward. Now, moving forward, what's going to happen? Well, roughly about 2 weeks after I sent the letter into EPA, I got a letter back from Walter Mugden. Walter heads up the Superfund office over here at Region 2. And it said that they had received my petition and that they would commence the study I asked for. And that they would report back to the community by February 10th of 2016 as to whether or not they feel the river rises to the level of concern that it should be listed as a Superfund. So right now, as we speak, the Superfund offices over at EPA are buzzing with work where they're doing literature searches, they're doing you know, checking everything that they have in their computers and on the internet and every place else that they can draw from. That's a literature search, and that's one of the first things you have to do. And then I'm sure now that the weather is starting to break, they're going to start doing actual sampling of sediments in different parts of the river, up and down the river. And the one thing I told Jim O'Neill when it was time to break the story was, you must be sure that you don't say that this is only the lower part of the river. It's part of the river from Oradell to the bay. It has nothing to do with the upper part of the river up here, because this is our drinking water supply. This doesn't have the industry that we had in the lower part of the river. The water quality there is good, and the way United Water treats that water, it's very good. So what comes out of your tap is not only safe to drink, but it passes in every respect the Federal Clean Drinking Water Act rules and regs, and they report that to the community every year. So I'm not concerned so much about the sediments in the upper part of the river as I am about the sediments down here. Coming along as the Riverkeeper and taking people out on the water, which I do regularly from May through October every year, and I'm going to pass around my newsletter for everybody to take one if you didn't already get it. And it's got, besides this story, there's also a recap, I think, of our paddling and boat trips and stuff like that, or maybe it's a preview of this coming year. But we had roughly about 10,000 people between all of our endeavors that we brought out onto the river, onto the Overpeck Creek, into the watershed for a cleanup, you know, in a number of our outdoor education / recreation programs that we run, in order to reacquaint people with the Hackensack River in a positive way. And so, you know, moving through that, this body of people that we've had over the years is estimated to be somewhere around 70 to 80,000 people that we've brought out on the boats and given an opportunity to go paddling on the river and up and down the creek and whatnot. It's a lot of people. Needless to say, there's, you know, well over 1 million people in this watershed, and I could tell you that there's still a lot of people out there that never heard of me and don't even know that they live in the Hackensack River watershed because they're preoccupied with other things. You know, if you ask them where does your drinking water come from, they'll tell you it comes out of the tap. You know, and that's as far as they go. You know, they don't want to know what's behind the wall. They don't want to know what's under the street. You know, it comes out of the tap. That's where I get my water from. And some of them would say, oh, it comes off the shop right because they buy bottled water. But the point is that over the years, the lower part of the Hackensack River, the water quality in the river has really improved. It's improved enormously. Because I was around before the Clean Water Act. I was around when Pagoda had a primary treatment plant, and that meant that they only took out the big pieces and everything else went right into the river. Sea Caucus had the same type of a situation. They were dumping raw sewage into the river 24/7. And that was going on up and down the river in towns and cities all over. They, you know, the quickest and simplest way to dispose of their waste was to just run a pipe down to the river and dump it in there. So when I was a small boy, if you fell in the river, there was no way of covering it up because the odor would stay with you for days sometimes, because it was like swimming in sewage. You know, the Clean Water Act changed a lot of that. The Bergen County Utilities Authority came into being in a legal way, in a way that they had never been before, and secondary sewage treatment became the law of the land with the Clean Water Act, and a lot of the industry that was fouling our waters either moved away or were required to get permits that eliminated their discharges to the river. We don't have a single industrial discharger on the river today that discharges directly into the waterway. The dischargers along the Hackensack River that are still around, the companies that would, in the old days, be a discharger, what they do is they pre-treat their wastewater and then they deposit it into the sanitary sewer system, and it goes, for the most part, at least in Bergen County, it goes down to the DCUA where it gets final treatment there before it passes through into the environment. So we're talking about surface water quality, we're talking about the quality of the water in the river. For the most part, that's usually fairly good. There, you know, anybody who knows me knows this other issue that we've been working on for years is the combined sewer issue. And even that is going to start to change because of the work that we've done. And the city of Hackensack recently applied for permits to remediate the Anderson Street fallout that they have. And they recently put in a fee by a statute of the town, by a law in the town. The big redevelopment plan that they have from the Main Street corridor, the players in that big redevelopment are going to have to contribute to an upgrade in the sewers. I told that to the town a couple of years ago when they first started talking about this redevelopment plan, and I said, I'm not going to stand in the way of redevelopment, but your sewers might. And they said, really? And I said, you're going to bring in the kind of density that you're talking about with a lot of residential rising up above the commercial. You're going to need to upgrade the sewers because otherwise you're going to have overflows 24/7. And so they took that to heart, and the city of Hackensack is actually working on a CSO issue. But that addresses water quality. What I'm asking the EPA to do has to do with the sediments in the river. Because during the 19th and 20th century, industry threw stuff in the river that they thought would get washed away. But today, we know that it didn't get washed away, a lot of it. What it did was it settled into the mud. Some of these chemicals, like PCBs and dioxins, can actually become part of the mud, that you can't even wash it out of there anymore. The only way to get rid of it is to burn it. You have to scoop the mud out and then run it through a thermal induction process at how many degrees? Almost 3,000 degrees or something like that. And then all the gases from that have to go back in to be reburned again and reburned again in order so that there are no releases to the environment. We need to look at the sediments because that's what's holding the river back. If we want to be able to tell our children and our grandchildren that it's okay to go down to the Hackensack River and catch a fish, bring it home and eat it, or if it's okay, if you go into the water, if you go for a swim, you're not going to get sick. That's the only thing we can do, is clean up the sediments in the river. Once it's done, it'll be another generation's job to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But we have to fix it now. And I'm not so much of a cockeyed optimist to believe that it's going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while. And I said that to the few people that complained, oh, this is going to take forever. And I said, yeah, but you have to start somewhere. There's a saying about, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Well, I just took that step. And I did it on your behalf. I did it on behalf of all the people in the Hackensack River watershed. And I also did it on behalf of the wildlife that uses the river and on behalf of the public trust.